But if we're given knowledge and information outside of convention, outside the box of convention, or say we merge quantum physics and neurophysiology, and the brain is asked to contemplate, or we're asked to contemplate on that, and examine the what-ifs and possibilities and potentials, and associate our knowns with our experience of what we know, and repeat it over and over again, the brain is going to start to integrate two independent neural nets, and it's going to create a new vision.
This is yet another unfounded assertion, and one that goes against all scientific understanding of how organic chemistry and biology works. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and this claim has yet to meet its burden of proof in this regard.
And that new vision is going to be by taking a flashlight and shining it from those 2,000 bits of information that have to do with our body and our environment and time, slightly over in the dark, and looking at something new. That's called realization.
No, that's called speculative pseudoscientific nonsense. Evidence exists to demonstrate that all brains in all living creatures put their capacity to the most effective utilization. An example of this is in people born with sensory impairments. The brain rewires itself as they grow up to compensate for the lost sense by increasing the amount of brain power allocated to the remaining ones. This is why blind people are able to hear better than those with sight, why deaf people often have far superior peripheral vision to those who can hear, and why people who are both deaf and blind have better tactile and olfactory senses than those with sight and hearing. This contradicts the claim made here that we can just increase our ability to see and hear if we just wish that it were so. A claim, I might add, that is again not supported by any evidence. We are skipping the next scene that follows. I am not here to focus on the theatrics of the movie, just on the claims presented within, so all portions of the movie that are story narratives are cut out.
People ask me, why does quantum mechanics matter, given that it's little tiny stuff and who cares? There are three possible answers. From a practical point of view, it doesn't make any difference at all. I mean, you still have to go to work and drive your car and do all the rest of it. From a second point of view, it infiltrates everything in the world, especially the world of electronics. When you go to the supermarket and you do the scanning at the checkout, that's a quantum mechanical effect.
Who is Dean Radlin? A senior scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, serves as an adjunct faculty at Sonoma State University and on the Distinguished Consulting Faculty at Saybrook Graduate School in San Francisco, has a BSEE with honors in electrical engineering from the University of Massachusetts, an MS Electrical Engineering and a PhD Psychology from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, has an extensive list of qualifications in parapsychology and psi, or psychic, research, and as you may imagine is not formally qualified in quantum mechanics despite his impressive resume in electrical and electronic engineering fields. What is the Institute for Noetic Sciences? Comprises offices, a research centre and a retreat. Includes programs such as extended human capacities, emerging worldviews, and topics such as spontaneous remission and spirituality, psychic abilities, and survival of consciousness after bodily death, in other words, things that cannot be demonstrated with evidence. Founded by former Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell and investor Paul N. Temple, it appears Edgar Mitchell said, "The presence of divinity became almost palpable about his journey towards the Earth after returning from the Moon." Is listed by the founder of Quackwatch as one of the 729 organizations that he views with considerable distrust. What is Quackwatch? A non-profit organization in the United States dedicated to combating health-related frauds, myths, fads, fallacies, and misconduct, focusing on providing quackery-related info that is difficult or impossible to get elsewhere. Operates as an alternative medicine watchdog, advising on unproven or ineffective alternative medicine remedies. Cites peer-reviewed articles from mainstream science. Is criticized, not surprisingly, by supporters of those practices that it criticizes. And is affiliated with 21 other similar sites designed to advise against similar misleading claims in other fields.
But I think the important part is the third one, which is essentially a philosophical issue.
How exactly quantum mechanics and philosophy interact is something that appears only to be valid from the point of view of the producers and the audience of What the Bleep Do We Know, Spirit Space, and The Secret.
Why are philosophers so passionate about deconstructing the assumptions of the world? I finally got it. I got it as a result of looking at quantum mechanics and comparing it to classical mechanics. They present two very different ways of thinking about the way that the world works and about what we are.
More pseudoscientific nonsense. How people think about the way they are has little to do with the processes that describe how the macroscopic world works, nor do they have much to do with the way in which the atomic and subatomic scales of the universe work. To suggest that the uncertainty principle in quantum physics applies to affecting reality by thought is a horrible misuse of the science.
So from a classical perspective, we are machines.
That's a matter of opinion. In terms of hard fact, all life can be construed as organic machinery, but only if you define machine to encompass living organisms and biology itself.
And in machines, there's no room for a conscious experience. It doesn't matter if a machine dies, you can kill a machine, you can throw it in a dump, it doesn't matter.
Great. So now we're back on the appeals to emotion again, are we? What Dr. Radlin is saying is utterly false. Whether scientists examining biology take the view that biological organisms are soft machines or not, does not in any way impact on how they feel if one of their relatives, friends, or loved ones, who are also machines, dies. And while it is true that the world at large may not care about an individual death, much closer relations definitely do care. This guy knows that, which makes his statements dishonest and reprehensible. Really now.
If that is the way that the world is, then people will behave in that way.
And now it's time to go down the slippery slope of utter stupidity on a professional scale. Ignoring for the moment the fact that most people would likely not behave that way, given that we have evolved the capacity for compassion, kindness, and a lot of other emotional attributes to help societies to thrive on Earth, I'd again like to point out that Dr. Radlin, like Lynn McTaggart before him, is asserting a position of acceptance for a proposition that no one of sound mind would truly accept, regardless of whether or not they accepted classical mechanics. Only a sociopath would accept Dr. Radlin's suggestion.
But there's another way of thinking about the world which is suggested, it's pointed to by quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics deals with one field and one field only. Quantum mechanical phenomena. Let's not go the appeal to immersion route again.
Which suggested that the world is not this clockwork thing, but it's more like an organism. It's a highly interconnected organismic thing of some type, which extends through space and time. In that kind of environment, what I think and the way that I behave has a much greater impact, not only on myself, but on the rest of the world, than it would if it was a classical world.
Such a horrible misuse of scientific methodology. If you allow your life and how you treat people to be dictated by the idea of accepting either quantum physics or macroscopic mechanistic physics, a field I might add that has had evidential support for centuries, then not only are you allowing a false dichotomy to dictate your life, but you are in need of either an education or some extensive counselling. Just to remind everyone, quantum physics and classical mechanics deal with their respective fields, not philosophy. Not social humanities, not emotional concepts of any kind.
So, from a very basic point of view having to do with morals and ethics, what I think affects the world.
Only in a limited fashion and only in how your thoughts inform your actions. It seems like Dr. Radlin here is trying to suggest that the acceptance of a given scientific discipline is going to lead to a particular set of consequences. Those familiar with logic will already recognize which logical fallacy Dr. Radlin just committed.
That's, in a sense, that's really the key for why a worldview change is important.
Unfortunately, you cannot base your worldview around a scientific discipline of limited application. Quantum physics deals with things at a microscopic level. Really now, this is as bad as people claiming homeopathic remedies work, because the quantum uncertainty principle prevents scientists from properly quantifying these things, and that's why they don't appear to work for experiments, because people don't really believe in them. It's completely ludicrous.
Let's talk about the subatomic world, and then we'll talk about what it's telling us about reality. The first thing I want to tell you about the subatomic world is it's totally a fantasy created by mad physicists trying to figure out what the heck is going on when they do these little experiments. By little experiments, I mean big energy in little spaces and little pieces of time. It gets pretty nutty at that realm of things, and so subatomic physics was invented to try to figure that all out.
Wait just a minute. Did Mr. Wolf really suggest just then that scientists are essentially making this up as they go along? I'm going to be as clear as I can possibly be now. Scientists talk about the subatomic world because they have experimented to determine if things can exist below the atomic level. That's right. They experiment and they test. And in the end, they demonstrate that something does exist below the atomic level. An example of this is the constituent parts of all matter. Elementary fermions make up all matter in the universe. These things are subatomic. We have conducted the experiments, we have analysed the results, and as a result, we have reached a consensus that demonstrates these particles exist. Contrary to Mr. Wolf's suggestion here, scientists do not make this up as they go along. I therefore count this as further evidence of both Mr. Wolf and the producer's dishonesty and deception. I'm skipping the rest. All Mr. Wolf talks about is how quantum physics is subject to debatable hypotheses and thoughts, and then speculates further that this is subject to a whole range of debatable feelings and intuitions as to, quote, what the heck is really going on, end quote. And once again, feelings and intuitions are irrelevant in scientific discourse.
So, on the one hand, you had a theory which from the conceptual standpoint was profoundly puzzling, and on the other hand, from the practical standpoint, was vastly more successful than anything we had ever seen before. This is the kind of situation that produces the tension that all of the investigations of foundations of quantum mechanics are feeding off of since then. Because on the one hand, this is an acutely paradoxical, puzzling, conceptually confusing theory. On the other hand, we have no option along the lines of throwing it out or neglecting it because it is the most powerful, proven tool for predicting the behaviors of physical systems that we have ever had in our hands.
Dr. Albert's statements have again been taken out of their original context by this show's producers. Here, he talks about how quantum mechanics is simultaneously a mystery in terms of how the subatomic works, and also a practical field in which we can create a large variety of modern electronic systems and conduct experiments in our world. However, watch what this clip segues into as we again have Mr. Hameroff speculate further.
The universe is very strange. There seem to be two sets of laws that govern the universe. In our everyday classical world, meaning at roughly our size and time scales, things are described by Newton's laws of motion.
I suspect that in actuality the universe would be better described by Einstein's theory of relativity. Newton's laws of motions and his subsequent theory of gravity are fine in explaining what happens within the context of this planet and perhaps in a limited fashion the solar system. But once you start dealing with vast distances and velocities approaching the speed of light, Newton's gravitational theory and laws of motion are less and less accurate, so their validity is limited. This is where relativity enters the picture.
However, when we get down to a small scale, when we get down to, say, the level of atoms, a different set of laws take over. These are the quantum laws, quantum theory, quantum mechanics. And at that level, particles may be in multiple places at the same time. They may behave as waves smeared out spatially and temporally. They may be interconnected over great distances. They may be unified into one quantum state, into one state, governed by one wave function. And the borderline, the threshold, this curtain between the quantum world and the classical world is really mysterious. It's called sometimes the collapse of the wave function, because in the quantum world, everything is in superposition of multiple possibilities, and in the classical world, these multiple possibilities seem to collapse to particular definite choices. So everything is in one particular place.
So, after a bunch of half-truths and correct statements, Mr. Hameroff has speculated that the quantum world collapses as you go beyond the subatomic level and towards the macroscopic world. What he does not realize is that he has just inadvertently admitted that quantum principles do not operate above the subatomic level, because at that level macroscopic mechanics takes over and things become consistent with classical physics. Contrary to what the producers of this movie think, nothing that Mr. Hameroff has said supports their premise that quantum physics can allow you to use the power of thought to perform super powerful miracles and break macroscopic physical laws.